Welcome to tonight's joint program of the Commonwealth Club and the Marines Memorial Association. I'm Major General Myatt, retired, and I'm President and CEO of the Marines Memorial Association. I'm your chair for tonight's program. For information on the Commonwealth Club, go to their website, commonwealthclub.org. Information on the Marines Memorial, you military guys, go to marinesmemorial.com. And it's my pleasure to introduce today's distinguished speaker, General Robert Brown, Commanding General, U.S. Army Forces, Pacific. In recent years, the Pacific region has garnered attention related to North Korea and South China Sea. They're all looming large in the public mind, particularly, I would say, North Korea right now. Since 2016, General Brown has overseen the U.S. Army's largest service component, Command. Headquartered at Fort Shafter, Hawaii, with portions of the command forward deployed. And I was telling you, when I had the privilege of working in Korea with part of those forward deploys, the 2nd Infantry Division. They're based throughout Indo-Asia Pacific, 106,000 active reserve and civilian support the nation's strategic objective and commitment to the region. Today, General Brown will discuss the current security dynamics in the Pacific from the perspective of land forces throughout the region, with emphasis on the centrality of leadership and the U.S. Army's emerging concept of multi-domain battle, which ought to be very interesting. Prior to this command, General Brown most recently served as a commanding general of U.S. Army Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. He also served for 12 years with units focused on the Indo-Asia Pacific region, and he was Deputy Commanding General of the 25th Infantry Division, which included 2 deployments to Operation Iraqi Freedom. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the U.S. Military Academy, a Master's of Education from the University of Virginia, and a Master of Science in National Security and Strategic Studies from National Defense University. Please welcome General Robert Brown.
I just wanted to start by saying our thoughts and prayers are with all those who tragically lost their lives and the folks going through this tough situation, and the victims of the fire. And then our thoughts are also with those first responders out there, the firemen. There's some 8,000 firefighters. I think there's 740 U.S. Forest Service personnel. 85% of FEMA's 10,000 employees out there. Of course, the California National Guardsmen out there and a lot of their assets as well. So, our heart is with them. And we were just discussing, I was discussing before we started with a bunch of people here, what a tough year, everything going on. So I really appreciate it. I know it is not easy for many of you to get here. And quite honestly, we were trying to get here from D.C. last night, and the flight kept getting delayed, and I almost thought for a minute we might have to cancel. So I'm just so glad we didn't have to do that. And if there was one person here, we'd go on with the program. But thanks so much, because I know it was hard for so many of you to get here. We also have really proud to be able to work with a great American, Gil Sanborn, who made this happen. He's our civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army, and they fill a key role for us across every state. Has a few. California has a few due to the size, a few more than other states, but I know of none finer than Gil and what he does. He was up helping folks up north with the fires, and several recruiters who lost their homes, and guardsmen whose homes are in trouble and so forth. You know, just typical of how he is helping soldiers and families. Thanks for that. And then one of our newest, Brent Parmenter, I worked with him previous job, and we're awful lucky to have him on board as a civilian aide to Secretary of the Army, so just fantastic. And then you see the folks in uniform here. No, I didn't order them to be here. I'm really glad they're here and thank them. I know they're busy and they've got a lot of stuff going on. So Corps of Engineers, JROTC here, Recruiting Command, University of San Francisco ROTC here, and then there's some FEMA folks here as well, which is fantastic. Military folks working with FEMA as well. So thanks so much for being here. That makes such a difference. Now, I suppose you might also wonder, am I a little bit intimidated or nervous being in a Marine Memorial, the Marine Memorial Club, being an Army guy? But I can assure you I'm not, because my father was a Marine, and he was enlisted, and then came back and went through University of Pennsylvania NROTC and was a Korean War veteran. He was in the Marines 9 years, and my two older brothers, he hardly ever saw him, and so he ended up getting into business. Did very well in business, but one reason I'm here serving, one was a guy named Coach K recruited me to play basketball at West Point, but my dad's eyes lit up when he said West Point, and I went to visit. And my dad talked about his time in the Marine Corps his whole life, even though he's very successful in business, and sort of told me something. And his whole life, if I ever got a meeting that said Semper Fi, I was good to go. I had a T-shirt. He was very happy, you know. So he's a very proud Marine, as almost all Marines are, no doubt. So I'm not intimidated at all. I'm very proud, and I know my dad's smiling up there, and I'm very proud to be here. So really, Indo-Asia Pacific region, as was mentioned, I think about 30 plus years ago, when I was a much younger officer, had hair, it wasn't gray. I started in the Pacific, and it's amazing to see how it has changed. It is right now, of course, in the middle of all kinds of issues. And I want to go through it and really emphasizing the situation with North Korea more than anything, because I know that's probably first and foremost on your minds. I know it is for us. But then other issues in the Pacific as well. And then sort of tell you a little bit about what we plan to do. As you heard, we've got about 106,000 from Washington State is really, we have the 1st Corps. I had the honor of commanding the 1st Corps, and they're at Washington State. They're assigned to the Pacific with units, striker brigades, and other brigades. And then we have forces in Alaska, an airborne brigade, a striker brigade. We have forces, a division in Hawaii, forces in Japan, 28,000 in Korea. We also have forces on Guam, American Samoa, and Saipan throughout the Pacific. So that's at 106,000. And obviously, for us, if something happens, all my forces that I own are either there in Korea already or will be there within hours. So obviously, it's first and foremost on our thoughts and what we're dealing with. So let me go through a little bit of that. But let me look first, I'll kind of look at as we look at how the world has changed. And it's been fascinating to see as an old guy now. This is what's being depicted on the screen from 2004 to 2014, the growth of the internet. And as they run through that, at the end, that's 2014. Of course, it's even brighter now, just in a few years. And you can see in the beginning. So that connectivity of people is pretty amazing. It has increased the velocity of human interaction. It's changed things fundamentally out there for business, for sports, for the military. It's changed things. When I was a younger officer, the fog of war used to be not enough information. Really, the first half of my career, I'm at about 37 years now. The first half, it was really the fog of war, it was not enough information. Now, what's the fog of war? Too much information. I heard it over here. It's, you got your doggone device, 150 emails a day, and I have to have a account just to see my grandkids' pictures, and they post it a certain place, and you have to, I don't know how anybody has time for all that. And you go talk to somebody, you say, hey, how you doing? What's happening with your family? And they'll tell you all about your family because they saw it on Facebook. And it kind of ruins the moment, or you want to tell, well, okay, I already heard that, okay, whatever. But it's changed. A tweet can be heard around the world, right? And we all know, that's happening out there. You can have hundreds of thousands gather in a moment's notice. So it has really fundamentally changed things out there. And we reached a milestone most people don't even realize. I think in 2008, we surpassed more things connected to the internet than people on Earth. More things connected. And by 2020, we'll have 50 billion things connected to the internet. Now, if everybody that was on there if they were doing good things, that'd be wonderful news. But unfortunately, there's folks on there that, many people doing good things, thank goodness. But there's a lot trying to do bad things, steal your money, you name it, all kinds of stuff. Recruit, share information, all kinds of things it's used for. So it has fundamentally changed, and in some ways you could say it's really, as you look, the first time in history for us in the United States, those that would do us harm can actually share information faster than we can on the internet. Why? Well, because they lie. In many cases, we want to tell the truth. It takes time to tell the truth. You want to be first with the truth, but you have to verify stuff. But those out there who don't care about the truth, they can share information a lot faster, and that's different, much different. If you think back to World War II, for example, we knew the German and Japanese codes. We knew their codes. We broke it. It was still difficult to defeat them. We don't know the codes anymore, and they can communicate very rapidly. So it changes things in the world. So just looking at the Pacific specifically, and that circle there's a circle that covers about a third of the Pacific region. It's 51% of the Earth's surface, and there was a lot of blue there, and I'll address that, a lot of ocean. But when you look at that, more people live inside that circle than outside that circle, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. More people inside that circle, not even the whole Pacific region, than outside that circle. So we say, the Pacific region, it's from Hollywood to Bollywood, from, penguins to polar bears. It's 4 billion people. 7 out of every 10 people will live in the Pacific region by 2050. That's a prediction by 2050. 7 out of every 10 people. A thing called megacities, a city of 10 million or more. There's 36 in the world right now, and it changes all the time, obviously. It's adjusting. But right now, 36 megacities. 24 of them are in the Pacific, which surprised the heck out of me. And I thought I knew a lot about the Pacific, but I didn't realize not even half, more than half. 24 out of 36 megacities. 7 of the 10 largest armies in the world are in the Pacific, which is shocking to most people. You think it's blue, it's mostly navies. Actually, of the 36 countries in the Pacific, 26 have militaries, and most have armies and not navies. And I just say that because it's interesting, who's in charge, and now others are growing navies and trying, we'll talk about that a little more later, but it's fascinating. 16 time zones, 100,000 ships pass through the Straits of Malacca each year. That's a quarter of the entire world trade. And 7 of the 8 fastest growing markets in the world are in the Pacific. So I just point all this out because every now and then you'll kind of hear, well, why are we a Pacific nation? We've been a Pacific nation for over 100 years. Well, clearly there's darn good reason. It's growing rapidly, has grown, and it's amazing. So as you look at it, again, there is a lot of blue out there in the Pacific, but people live on the land. And all the services, it's so complex in the Pacific, and I would say anywhere in the world, all the services need to work close together. The military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Special Ops, and even the Coast Guard have to work closely together, or we can't solve these tough problems. We really need teamwork from everybody, no doubt about it. So we have when you look at the threats that are out there, I'll start off with the most dangerous, and you see that picture there of Kim Jong-un, watching a missile launch. Now, I was briefing this to some cadets at West Point, and they were like, wow, sir, that's pretty cool. How'd you get that picture, And they thought we had a little drone that flew in there and took this picture, and I wish we could do that. But unfortunately, this is a propaganda picture from North Korea. And if it wasn't, we could have solved the problem pretty easily, I think, if you know what I mean. So anyway, very interesting time, as you look at the number of missile launches, 88 and counting, and obviously There's been tremendous, rhetoric in the past and so forth, but never as belligerent and blatant as right now. And then the other thing I think that is interesting is over my career, I've seen, flare-ups in 1994, flare-ups in 2010. But the difference is, although we've been in Korea a long time, since the Korean War, and there's been flare-ups, North Korea has never had the capability to reach out and touch beyond South Korea. They can reach out now and obviously already can reach Japan with no problems, and Guam, and then there's arguments on whether they can reach the United States and how successful and work in the reentry. But the reality is some people think they can now. Some think it'll happen. It's a little later, but it's going to happen. And so the can has been kicked down the road quite a ways, and we're at a point where now it is different because you have this individual who can reach out and touch. And he's all about survival of the regime, having that capability for survival of the regime. Of course, the lead is the pressurization. The diplomatic pressurization campaign is the lead and should be the lead, and we support that as the military. And no one, I can assure you, having been to combat numerous times, no one prays for peace harder than a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman. No one prays for peace harder, and no one wants that to work more. But at the same time, when we raised our right hand, took an oath to the Constitution of the United States, they asked the military to be ready. And so of the 106,000 soldiers that I have in the Pacific, nobody's going to say, okay, go. And I say, well, we're not quite ready. That's not how it works. We have to be ready. We have to work on that daily. And there's no chance to say, hey, we don't make the decisions, but we need to be ready to go. And we've been working on it very hard with all the other services as well, obviously. And that, of course, is great support to the diplomatic campaign, and then also as a form of deterrence. The readier you are, who's stupid enough. So it's a good form of deterrence, and that's a key thing. If you're the toughest military out there, is somebody really going to want you to deal with them? Usually not, but occasionally it does happen, that's for sure, as we all know. And there's no question, worldwide, unanimous United Nations, 2 sanctions in a row now of 8. There's the last 2 unanimous, which is very rare, as we all know, saying, hey, stop this, to Kim Jong-un. And so it is a worldwide statement, no doubt about it. So that's North Korea and that threat, and it is what, I will tell you, keeps me up at night. I sleep a little bit more right now than 6 months ago because we've been working on this. I have responsibility of setting the theater for the Pacific Command. The Army provides most of the logistics, medical, communications for the other services because we're designed that way. And then we also, of course, for the Army forces. And then I have the responsibility of non-combatant evacuation operations from Korea if that has to happen. Briefed the Secretary of Defense on that a couple months ago. That's a tough mission, about 500,000 people. You can imagine how difficult that would be off the peninsula. We rehearse it, practice it, work it, but there are circumstances where it could be a lot tougher than others, and be happy to go into more on that if you want later. So that's kind of, there of the 5 challenges our nation faces, that's one, North Korea. And another is, of course, China and Russia as a challenge. And China, competition with China, of course, doesn't need to be conflict. We try to work with China closely. We actually have an exercise we're doing in a few weeks in Oregon, Disaster Management Exchange, and we're working humanitarian assistance, disaster relief for floods. Pretty timely. It was planned a year ago, and how to help people learn techniques from each other, and we work closely on that. But the challenging part with China is sometimes they don't necessarily, they'll say one thing and then do another. And so it gets kind of challenging. But I've always wondered, there's a photo here for those, I guess, being broadcast on radio, of Putin and Xi. And I've always wondered, is that vodka or is it Chinese baijiu they're drinking? And then there's a toast there and they're smiling. What are they toasting? I'm a little paranoid, I guess. I think it's something about us is what I'm thinking. I don't know. But so let me just a little bit more on China. For example, you've got South China Sea, Fiery Cross Reef. That's 2006. It's a reef, not an island, barely above water. At high tide, it's not above water. Now look, 2016, so they say they're not going to militarize it, and then you look, and here it is 10 years later, and they've done the reclamation work and so forth and militarized the entire thing. So it's kind of, okay, come on, you know, you say one thing, do another, trying to work, competition, don't want it to be conflict, working hard at that. And then I got to go to deal with a lot of Chinese senior leaders, was in China last November. It was an interesting time right after our elections. So you can imagine, got lots of questions. And but it was fascinating because something was different. First of all, I got more exposure than I'd ever gotten before, just from relationships with some of the senior Chinese leaders. I got to see a lot, but something was different. I couldn't quite put my hand on what was, my thoughts on what was different. And then finally I did. You know, what was different clearly was they used to fear us and respect us as a military, I would say. Now they don't fear us anymore. They respect us, but they do not fear us. It's very interesting. And so, again, you know, we're so tied economically, and we want to be good partners and so forth. But at the same time, again, we have to be ready for whatever is going to happen, and do their words match their actions, and we work that pretty consistently. Russia is also in the Pacific. And a lot of people forget that. Obviously, they're in Europe and some of the things they've done in Europe, but they're in the Pacific in a major way, and have a huge militarization of the Arctic going on. Just a few stats from that, you know, 10 search and rescue stations, 16 deep water ports, 13 airfields, 10 air defense radar stations across the Northern Sea route that are going in. Meanwhile, we're still working on our Arctic strategy. So, I mean, it's, they're moving out. They also have been extremely aggressive in their bombers. They flew some bombers, Bear bombers, around Japan, completely encircled Japan. They flew up closer to Alaska than they have before, twice now. In 2 years, we had to intercept them with F-22s just last April. They did it in April 2016 as well. Just interesting. And they're there also, I would tell you, to fill every void. Like, for example, when Thailand had a coup, and we stopped interacting with Thailand, as much because of the coup, obviously, waiting for elections, and you know, this is, well, Russia was right there. We'll give you any equipment you need, whatever you need, and that's a pretty par for the course across the board. China was there as well. As we stopped Thai officers from coming to U.S. schools, they're going to Chinese schools. You know, it's just void. The void is filled quickly, no doubt about it. We have other issues in the Pacific. As mentioned, 4 or 5. The other is extremist ideology, unfortunately, has hit the region. As folks are leaving, areas squeezed by pressure, the Middle East, Africa, and other areas, they're looking for where they can go. And one place they found was the Philippines. And there was, if you're following this, in Marawi, quite an effort still ongoing, although it looks like Philippine Army has it under control. But it's interesting because the experts a couple months ago said, well, we think ISIS will be in the city for a little bit and then get out of there and go to the mountains and the jungles. And not at all. They stayed in the city just like they did in Mosul, and dug in and held hostages and made it one heck of a tough fight there. And 30 organizations within the Pacific, 30 organizations have pledged to ISIS, sworn to ISIS, and more just about every day. So again, this is a worldwide, the extremist ideology, another thing we deal with. The most likely thing we will deal with, again, I would say is, if you look, is a disaster response. Tragically, the Pacific is the rim of fire. 7 out of 10 people in the world who are killed by disaster, it's in the Pacific. It's really a tragic statistic. It's, between typhoons, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis. I was just with the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force yesterday, and we were talking. It was interesting. There was a subject on humanitarian assistance. When they had a few years ago, tragically had the tsunami, earthquake, and nuclear disaster, they were doing exercises before that, and they said, hey, they were going to do an exercise with that, and everybody said, that's not realistic. Why would you? It's got to be realistic, and then it happened. So it's almost like you can't predict these things. And again, when you look, unfortunately, in the area, there are all kinds of issues, and so we've got what we look to do, working closely with every nation in the Pacific, including, as I mentioned, China, and every nation, to save lives. and it's the right thing to do. And we get great help from Corps of Engineers, for example. They are incredibly helpful across the Pacific, from helping folks with flood control, flood relief, you name it, saving lots of lives, to response and so forth. This exercise we'll have with China, we're actually talking through how you have, like when China came to help in Nepal after the earthquake, they wouldn't coordinate with any other country there. They just came in and everybody's working together for the same cause, but it was very disruptive because, you know, you'd need water in one place and it had it, you need it in another. They didn't know what was going on. So we were able to work with them. And in the next month, we started last year, and next month they realized there's a multinational coordination center where you coordinate everything so it's efficient, effective, saving lives, and they're part of that. You know, so that's the type of thing, working together, you can save lives, and we try to do every single day, no doubt about it. Another thing, so that's the 4 of the 5 threats. The only threat we don't have of the 5 in the Pacific is Iran. But Iran does deal with, like, North Korea and others. So indirectly they are in the Pacific, but the other 4 are there. The other thing that's out there, some people know this term, others don't, black swans. You know, those high impact events that happen and come out of nowhere. And this is something that, again, I've seen in my time in the military is a significant change. When I was younger, and if you didn't predict something happening, they'd say you were a lousy planner, you know, you just didn't think through the situation. Well, what's happened over time is that's no longer the case. Things can happen, come out of nowhere. In fact, black swans are sort of becoming the norm out there. Things that come out of nowhere, be it a disaster that kind of comes out of nowhere. Often there's some warning with a disaster, but more the other things. Like, for example, there's a picture of the Spanish flu in 1918 and how devastating that was. 911 was a black swan, obviously. Even the recent WannaCry malware, that was a black swan, came out of nowhere, and what it did. Fascinating that one individual helped stop that, you know, a British government worker that saw a flaw in the program was able to quickly, you know, so the power of one individual I'll talk about. So black swans are a real issue, and it's kind of changed. I'll talk a little bit later and be happy in questions to go into more how we prepare, because, you know, again, 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, you could be more predictable in what you were preparing for. Now you have to deal with more uncertainty, and so we've actually changed with leaders where you'd say you have to be comfortable in ambiguity and chaos. Comfortable isn't good enough. You have to thrive in ambiguity and chaos, and you have to thrive in those tough, uncertain conditions. And that's a different way to educate, a different way to train, and it's key. And I see businesses running into the same challenges and many others. The same thing, it's happening. The stuff comes from nowhere, and it happens so fast because of what we were talking about earlier, the connectivity and velocity of human interaction. So I've given you a lot of bad news there, and I don't want you to leave depressed. You know, you'll never come to another lecture again. And there was some good news in there, but some bad. So, you know, so what can we do about it? Well, there's a bunch we can do about it. I can assure you all the services are out there on a daily basis. We do 300 engagements a year across the Pacific, from major exercises with allies to one-on-one engagements with senior leaders, to exchanges, and these things make a difference. For example, just 2 weeks ago, I was in Korea, Republic of South Korea, and we had 30 nations, a Pacific Army Chiefs Conference. All the chiefs of armies from 30 nations. Now, only 26 of those had military, so we had police chiefs there as well. The other 4 that didn't have militaries, from around the Pacific, including China. And everybody really but North Korea and a couple others that couldn't make it, you know, Bhutan and a couple others. So there we are with all the chiefs. And now it was planned 2 years ago. It rotates around where it is. Next year it'll be in Vietnam, but it was planned 2 years ago to be in Korea. And I didn't have anything to do with it. It was my predecessor. I told him, brilliant move, you know, just a brilliant, because what perfect timing with all that's going on. So here's 30 nations in Korea. And at one point, it was unbelievable. We had the first ever trilateral meeting of U.S. Army Chief of Staff, Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force Chief of Staff, and Republic of Korea Army Chief of Staff meeting together for the first time in history together. Because, you know, there are some historical issues between Japan and Korea still. So they, well, now they're meeting, and if you look at from a very negative thing of Kim Jong-un, what's a positive that's come from it? Kim Jong-un is trying to drive a wedge between nations. That's what he wants. It's not working. It's pulling folks together. And they're realizing, holy smokes, we all, as I mentioned, unanimous from United Nations, and then military-wise, pulling folks together. We at one point had the Chinese general arms linked with U.S., Japanese, and the Prime Minister of Republic of Korea, arms locked. Now, the only thing is he didn't want us to send out a photo of that. So we honored it. I'm not sure why, because when I was in China, they took all kinds of photos. I told them not to send out, but they did anyway, of me shaking their hands and stuff. I don't know why, but so we didn't do it. But, that type of progress is absolutely huge. Tailored engagements that assure our allies, strong allies. Of 7 alliances we have in the world, the United States, 7 alliances in the world. 5 are in the Pacific. Japan, Korea, Philippines, Thailand, and Australia with New Zealand. So 5 are allies, alliances. And so that's huge. So we assure those alliances, hey, we are true to our word, and we will be there for you. And they know that, and we know that. And again, another of the negative things happening. I have never seen a more ironclad alliance between the U.S. and Republic of Korea, U.S. and Japan, U.S. and Australia. I've never seen more ironclad because of the challenging times, which is good. That's what you need. These problems are so complex, you would be foolish to try to solve them alone. You've got to work and multinational, work together to solve these tough problems. We also look to promote an army in a democracy. In our case, the Navy's out there working how you are in some of these countries who are new, emerging democracies who are new. What does the Army do? There's some of them, they're not used to it. They may have come from being a dictatorship and different. So that's absolutely key. We look to enhance their military so they can do more and we can do less. A very good thing. I have a daughter who's a major, deployed multiple times, 2 son-in-laws. One's a major, one's a captain, just got back from Afghanistan. One of my son-in-laws is deployed 8 times. And it would be nice if others could do a little more and we could do a little less. So if you help them get better at what they're doing and they learn, that's a terrific thing. Sustaining those relationships and then really looking to where you can grow, or maybe you haven't had a great relationship. How can you? All those make a difference across the Pacific. And they're, if you look at, I would say, like areas with the greatest potential, India. Tremendous potential as we work closely. I was in India last year, and we signed a logistics agreement where we can do things easier together. That's significant, and they are a key player and want to do more and more with us, which is fantastic. So when you look at these tough problems, though, our advantage is our people. And I don't just say that lightly, like, oh, yeah, everybody. No, I'm telling you, our advantage, I've been honored to serve. The reason it kept me in, I wasn't going to stay in. I was going to be a basketball coach or something, get out. But I stayed in because of the tremendous people. And mostly in all the services, our non-commissioned officers, our NCOs. No one in the world can match our non-commissioned officers. It's not the officers. That's important as well, the officers. But the professional non-commissioned officers are amazing. And these individuals, I'll tell you, I've been so proud to serve with them. They'll deploy 10, 12, 13, 14 times and just keep deploying and taking care of soldiers and doing the right thing. It's absolutely amazing. And we have the right post-Vietnam. We learned as we were fixing the Army after Vietnam, one thing was the NCO Corps, NCO education, development, and we invested in it, and boy, am I glad we did. And we teach others how to do that in the Pacific, other nations, because that is the absolute key, and no one can match us, that's for sure. Irish poet, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Yeats, in 1923, he said, "Talent perceives differences, genius unity." And I would tell you, unity is what we need, and fortunately what we're getting across the Pacific region, Indo-Asia Pacific region, other regions as well, because with these tough problems, you have to have that, that's for sure. And let me give you an example. I'm talking about people. I'll go way back to World War II. This good-looking fellow here, when I was, that same briefing when I was leadership, I was talking to West Point cadets, and I said, does anybody know who this is? And one of the kind of smart aleck cadets said, sir, is that you? So anyway, that night we had a dinner with them, and they introduced me as a World War II vet, General Brown, So He is this individual is a part of our greatest generation. And just real quick story, it's an amazing story. I really researched it a lot when I was at National War College because I was taking a Stryker brigade, a new innovative type brigade, and I really wanted to work on innovation. So this is a sergeant. How long did we plan D-Day invasion? Anybody, any historians out there? Just roughly. The invasion of D-Day, it was pretty complex. How long do you think? Just guess, anybody. 3 years, I heard that. And that's a good, some would argue a little more, some would argue a little less. But regardless, we planned it probably more than any operation in the history of the world before or since. And planning's important, and we do that very well in the military. But no matter how hard you plan, even back then in World War II and certainly today, things are going to happen you don't anticipate. Even after planning 3 years, Patton was a deception operation for D-Day, for example. I mean, pretty intricate, an entire fake army in Patton and, all the things we did. So we get to the beaches, and we're stuck on the beaches. If you remember the Patton movie, Patton's all frustrated that they're stuck. And what for the historians out there, what caused us the problems? Anybody remember? These things called hedgerows. And hedgerows were, in the French hectares or acres of farming, they divided the farms. And they were huge, complex, I'll show you a picture in a minute here, vines that you couldn't get through. So the enemy gets a vote, always. The enemy always gets a vote. The enemy used those hedgerows, channelized us to the roads, and we couldn't get through. So young Sergeant Cullen, he saw on the beaches the hexagons that were left by the Germans to keep us from landing. And he used a torch and cut part of the hexagon and put a blade on the front of the tanks. And you see there, that was a later version of the blade. His was much cruder than that. But here's an E5 sergeant who came up with the idea of the blade. And you can go ahead and show the hedgerow on there. That's the hedgerow. You can see how tough it is to get through. But that worked. We got through the hedgerows. And obviously, the rest is history, right? And so that initiative, now I would ask you, what other army would listen to an E5 on the beaches in Normandy? That goes all the way up, and we do it. But that's the U.S. military. And my expertise, Army, of course, that's the U.S. Army. We not listen, but we implement, because the best ideas come from the edge, those closest to the problem. And we've seen it over and over again. The creativity is unbelievable from soldiers on the cutting edge. It's not the generals who are coming up with these creative ideas, shock of all shocks. It's the guys out there on the edge, closest to the problem. Their lives depend on it. And they will amaze you what they come up with. Fascinating in this is everybody tried to take credit for it. Generals, colonels, lieutenant colonels, majors. Eisenhower, being a great leader that he was, he traced it back and knew it was Sergeant Cullen. And I actually saw the letter and the award to Sergeant Cullen for that idea in the archives. And Eisenhower knew it, even though everybody else tried to take credit. Sergeant Cullen would lose a leg later in the war, but survived the war. Pretty amazing. And that's just one example. If we had more time, I could give you thousands from my experiences day to day in combat. Amazing. And that's our advantage, the people, no doubt about it. So one thing as we look, we really have a philosophy we changed it in 2008 from command and control, very strict, go left, go right, to a thing called mission command. And that could be a 3-hour, 4-hour talk in and of itself. But essentially, it's empowering those young leaders, building trust. So they, within a unit, everybody trusts each other. You give them parameters, not go do whatever you want to do, but you empower the heck out of them, and you discuss what prudent risk you're going to accept. You back them in what they do. And this is a fascinating thing to have watched it. I was actually using it in my unit way back in 2004 in combat, and then to see it come in, and now to see it moving forward, that empowerment. And those non-commissioned officers are the key to it. Because you can't do it. It can't be from the general, the colonel on. That's got to be those NCOs, and they understand it. And we're really good at it. It's a key philosophy. So that's where people are our advantage. And the good news is, even though some of the Chinese facilities I saw were the best facilities I've ever seen, and amazing equipment, lots of money being spent on their forces, and lots of others, and North Korea spending a lot of money, they can't match our people. In a million years, that initiative and that empowerment, they can't match it. Maybe they will someday, but right now they can't. So it gives us our advantage, no doubt about it. So just real quick about some future ideas, and I will just touch on this quickly, and I can go over more of it. That's I.B. Holly, famous historian in World War II. When you want to change something, it seems easy, but change is really tough in any organization, no doubt about it. But we realize we have to change, and we've been working on it. over the last, 10 years and really the last 3-4 years. And we realized that although we are the best joint force, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, Special Ops in the world, we still have to get better. And we have to go from being joint interdependent to being jointly integrated and integrated more. We all grow up in our stovepipes. So that's why, for example, Marine Forces Pacific, Lieutenant General Dave Berger, we are working daily together, or Marine Army, how we can work together with our Navy counterpart, Admiral Not So Swift, Pac Fleet Commander, with our Air Force, General Shags O'Shaughnessy, the Pacific Air Force, and then our Special Operations Commander, Major General Dan Yu. We're all working together so that, we over the last 16 years, what we've seen is folks have watched and they've gone after our weaknesses, and they've actually established very, complex anti-access area denial to not let us get somewhere, to not let us even leave the United States, and not let us do what we could do to take advantage of the military we have. They've actually worked that hard, and we've worked just as hard. That what we need to do is we need to use all what we would call the domains of warfare. And it's really an evolutionary. We were air-land battle that led us all the way through Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and 1991 there, to all domains, air, land, sea, cyber, and space. Where there is the greatest potential, cyber and space, also the greatest challenges with policies and everything else. So great potential, great challenges. But it's maneuver in multiple domains that cause multiple dilemmas to those you're going against. Don't be so predictable and linear. And to present multiple options to your command authority so they have lots of things they can do, multiple options, a lot of things being discussed right now. What options do we have? There's multiple options, and we really work that hard because you don't want to be predictable and you can't be linear today, you'll lose. And you got to do it as a team, multinational, together. And I'd be happy to go into more of that later if we need to, but again, kind of based on which direction you want to go. So we say we can no longer be victims of complexity. Sometimes we're all victims of complexity that's out there. We must become masters of complexity, thrive in ambiguity and chaos. And again, a different way to educate, train, and develop our folks. So they're expecting that, expect the unexpected, which we always did a little bit of, but you had to really ramp it up because it has changed, significantly. The fog of war from not enough information to too much information, and how do you deal with that? But clearly, again, I would emphasize absolutely 110%. The lead is the diplomatic pressure is the right thing to do and the smart thing to do, and China is a key to that. Again, obvious 90% of North Korea's trade and activity is with China. Now, I don't think, though, my personal, again, just my experience with China over the last 30 years, I don't think they lost a lot of control over North Korea they used to have. I think they used to have a lot more control, a lot more say in North Korea, and they don't have that. They've lost it. No, not all of it, but again, economically, and there was a debate initially with the pressure campaign. Clearly, you could see China. Do we go all out, or we do just enough, or what do we? I think what we've seen is they've actually done a pretty darn good job. Looks like they're really forcing the sanctions and sticking by it, which is really important. And I think that's our best chance of solving this. However, you have other folks that weigh in. Russia, for example, we'll take your coal, we'll take your oil. They're stepping right in. So I wish they would abide by the sanctions and listen certainly a little better. But that, to me, is the main effort, the main focus. Some of the military options you see or reminders, if you will, are in support of that diplomatic pressure campaign. Because, I believe when you're dealing with an individual like Kim Jong-un, it's, you want to show and kind of remind, hey, this is... we have quite a capability here, and you'd be very foolish to go on with this. So I do believe that's our best. And the last resort would be force. But I don't think it's smart to rule that out in any way, shape, or form. And certainly there are options out there. And as I mentioned, we'll look at all. One of the things I'm doing is making sure that, as I mentioned, in air, land, sea, cyber, and space, there are options out there in all of those. And there are ways that we can team together in those we never have before that are very powerful. And we're working on that daily. as where my job is to make sure the soldiers I own and then the military, all of us in the region, again, have folks prepared. Having been a commander in combat, the only way in the past that you know, it's a tough thing. The only way I've been able to survive that is I can look the parents in the eye and say, I have done everything I can do for your son or daughter. And again, having my own daughter, son-in-laws deployed, you know, I expect that from the leaders they're with, and that's the only way you can possibly do it. The only time I had difficulty with that, by the way, was when I was commanding 1st Corps, which is a corps has multiple divisions under it, at Joint Base Lewis McChord there, and we had sequestration hit. And I was telling every senator, every congressman that would listen, I cannot look the parents in the eye. I'm sending folks to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I cannot train them as well as they should be trained because of the budget cuts and what we were facing. We couldn't open ranges. We couldn't get them in. I mean, it was unbelievable. And fortunately, that did not last long, thank goodness. I hope that goes away forever, because that's a crazy way to do it. We have to have options. Obviously, I can't sit here and tell you what the options are, because we're not in the right setting and it's classified and all that. But I was hit up by a BBC reporter a few months ago that, you know, right away tried to hit me up and say, well, there really are no options. And I said, no, don't be stupid. There are options. Obviously, we don't want it to be the first choice, but and they would be devastating, those options, to North Korea. But it would be a very, very difficult fight, and nothing any of us want. And so hopefully China will continue to come through the pressure campaign, and Kim Jong-un will come to his senses, listen to the world, at least a little bit, to get talking and get things going.
So how has the increased North Korean threat been reshaping relationships and agendas in the Pacific region? You mentioned, you know, China has become a little more hardline against North Korea, but it must be Japanese defense forces becoming a little more forward-leaning. What else is going on in the region as a result of the increased threat?
That's a terrific question, and it has been a huge impact. Folks are afraid in the region. They don't want the conflict, but they also realize, and it has really accelerated. You could probably work 10 years to get close to a nation, and this threat has brought them closer than I've seen working a long time. Japan would be an example I would use. I always felt like when I was a mid-level officer, I was just really pushing them to do more, and now they're almost pushing us. That they want to do more, and they're afraid of. Now they can be hit by missiles from North Korea. That changes everything, and they're very afraid of that, and they do not want that to happen. They certainly do not want Kim Jong-un making that decision, of whether to launch a missile at them or not, with minutes to respond. And so they're very nervous. They're also, I would say, nervous over China, but mostly everybody very nervous over North Korea. And you'll see folks who were kind of, I would almost say, some nations who would sort of sit on the sidelines and watch are now, no, they want to be a part of it. They want to be in exercises with us. They want to be on the peninsula. 18 to 20 October, we'll do a non-combatant evacuation exercise on the peninsula in Korea. And we've done a bunch of them, and this is another. But this one we're moving to include all the sending states, about 22 nations, and including Japan, who's not a Five Eye partner and sending state necessarily, but and they all want to be a part of it. They're, a few years ago, if you tried to do that without the threat, they might have been, well, we're interested, but we're not. Now they all want to be a part of it, and so it has really pulled people together, which is a great thing, because they also are coming in with ideas and what can be done, and you need that for sure, because again, I would not want to tackle any of these complex problems alone. You really need a multinational effort, and sometimes we'll look at things, it's just natural. I've seen it over the years. We're very fortunate. One thing that's happened in the military is you'll see we've become so multinational. For example, I have 2 deputy commanding generals for the Pacific. One's a 2-star U.S. deputy, former division commander. The other is an Australian 2-star deputy commanding general. When I was commanding 1st Corps, I had a Canadian deputy commanding general and a U.S. commanding general. You're seeing that the 82nd Airborne has a deputy commanding general who's British. And this is a trend that's a very good trend, because when you're looking at a problem, you can't help it. You kind of look at it through the lens you grew up in. You look at it from, for us, an American perspective. And I can't tell you how many times that deputy will say, Sir, that is one way to look at it, but have you thought about this? Boom, 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 boom. They'll mention 5, 6 other things. You go, aha, you're right. We were looking at too much from our viewpoint. And so having those deputies, those allies there, and we have liaison officers, multiple liaison officers with us from many nations over 12 throughout the Pacific. They're with us in the headquarters, gives you a different perspective. Very, very useful for solving these complex problems. Critical.
You're very familiar with theater missile defense.
Yes.
So what is missile defense able to do to protect against the increasing North Korean nuclear threat?
I'm an infantry guy, and I remember the first time I started learning about missile defense when I was I was Admiral Fallon, the PACOM commander, about 10 years ago. He was here speaking, and that was a big issue at the time, and I started to learn about it. I was like, holy smokes, it's very complex. The Army owns the Patriot air defense systems and the THAAD, Theater High Altitude Air Defense System. Boy, I am really glad that years ago we spent a lot of research and effort to develop these ballistic missile defense systems. They are fantastic. And I have a tremendous commander of our ballistic missile defense throughout the Pacific, Brigadier General Sean Gainey, and he does an amazing job. Now, it's an interesting relationship. I own them. They are owned by the Army, but they work for the Air Defense Commander for the region, who is an Air Force 4-star, General O'Shaughnessy, the Pacific Air Force Commander, and the deputy for him is my Brigadier General and our units. And it is absolutely fascinating. I've actually been in the operations center when a launch has happened from North Korea. And really, literally, within seconds, there's a 22-year-old sergeant, incredibly well-trained, who immediately uses the radars and analyzes, passes it to National Command Authority. They're talking back and forth, using all these systems. They're linked in, and they know within seconds where it's going to hit and whether they need to shoot it down or not. And it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. I've also been in Guam with the THAAD defense system, and then in Korea as well. And you'd be awful proud. As I get older, some of these kids look like they're in high school or junior high, and you're there and you're like, oh my God, it's amazing. But they are incredible. They're tremendous professionals, very well trained. Is it a completely flawless system? Of course not. That doesn't exist anywhere in the world. Is it as good as anybody in the world? And would I stake my life on it? Yes. And these, how well trained they are. A lot of the issue on THAAD with China, for example, THAAD is a purely defensive system. It absolutely does. It can't shoot a missile. It shoots down missiles. It can't fire an offensive missile. It purely is defensive. But a lot of that has to do with, if you remember, in my opinion, again, a few years ago, when we were going to put some of these ballistic missile defense systems in Europe, and Russia just raised a stink about it, and so we didn't. And so I think some folk, they're worried about the other equations, but our kind of answer is, okay, we'll stop Kim Jong-un from firing missiles, and we won't need it there. But until you do that, it's going to save a lot of lives, and we have to have it there. And I'm awful glad they're very well trained, tremendous systems. We continue to develop them, though. There are improvements. We test it. We just had a test a few weeks ago that was successful. Because, of course, when you develop something, somebody's developing a counter to it. And today, that's one of the reasons people are such an advantage and have to be. Technology can only be an advantage. Again, when I hate to keep going back to when I was young, but when I was a captain like these young captains here, we owned the night, for example. We were the only ones who could see at night with night vision device. You couldn't get them anywhere else. So we did things at night, and it was pretty darn good. We were really good at night. Nobody else could. Now you can buy them off the internet better than what we can get. You can buy an unmanned aerial system and fly it within minutes. You can 3D print something and copy it. I mean, it's unbelievable. So technology is not the advantage it used to be. And so with our air defense systems, they are state of the art, but we need to keep looking at, because somebody's figuring out a way to negate the system, and you got to move on to what's the next one. You can never sit still or they're passing you by, and then you cannot protect the nation like we're called to do.
So you mentioned the benefits and the widespread nature of technology today. A lot of security agencies are benefiting from essentially retail technologies. I remember a friend of mine recently retired from the CIA and told me about how they're essentially creating wikis to bring in streams of intelligence from sources that they had never focused on before. How is the Army using off-the-shelf technology, kind of, handheld devices and so on? Any interesting creative ways?
Yeah, that's another great question. These are great questions. If coming from the audience, thanks very much, and I'm sure from you, Gloria, thanks so much. They're excellent. And I would tell you that that's one thing I'm really proud of. I had soldiers in combat, again, talking about the closest to the problem. For example, I had a unit that had the first unmanned aerial systems, a Stryker brigade that had a UAV we could put up, a Shadow UAV at the time. This is back in 2004. We were the first unit at the brigade. The brigade's about 5,000 soldiers to have that capability to see things that, so that's pretty neat. However, they could only stream the 2 boxes would get the feed, the video feed. And my area was from the Syrian border to the Turkish border to the Iranian border in northern Iraq with Mosul and Tal Afar and all those areas that I'm a little more familiar with than people used to be now. And so we were driving them 5-6 hours, flying them, trying to get them to people that can look at them and so I got all the experts. I said, there's got to be a way to get this feed to other places so others can see it, and they'll see something happening. You want to get the information right away in a timely manner. Well, none of the experts could figure it out, but a young specialist, E4, not even a sergeant, 22 years old, he looked and he found this technology called VBrick technology. And it's when you're at a stadium and you're getting a hot dog and all the screens have the same thing on the screen, it pulls in a feed and you see the same thing. So there we went from these boxes we had to drive around and hardly anybody knew it, to they could pull it into every computer in every operations center throughout. So hundreds of people could see it. And then another smart soldier came up with the idea of chat. So I'd be out in a Stryker, downtown Mosul, and a UAV would pick up, hey, there's somebody on the rooftop on the right you can't see, and we'd know it within seconds and be able to react. So again, solving these problems with technology. So that has gone like wildfire. And what you see now, the Secretary of Defense just talked about a couple days ago in D.C. I was at a talk Secretary Mattis gave, and he talked about we have to leverage industry with the latest, and we have to, our acquisition systems are broken. They're World War II systems that take forever, usually an average of 10 to 12 years. Well, again, it just doesn't work. So they created some places, Secretary Ash Carter, the previous Secretary of Defense, the last administration, DIUX right down the road here, a research lab down at, and partnering with industry better to take stuff off the shelf and get it to the soldier faster. Now, you have to test it. You have to make sure, all that gets soldiers involved. But we're seeing that every day. And kind of sadly, I wish it wasn't this way, they had to develop organizations where it doesn't go into normal acquisition process. It's sort of separate when you need it rapidly. And you might have seen on 60 Minutes, for example, Dr. Will Roper was talking about these unmanned aerial systems that could talk to each other and swarm and do all these things. That's an off-the-shelf system as an example that we've looked at, and there's hundreds and hundreds of others. So you have to get it there faster. You have to partner with industry. It used to be the Department of Defense would lead in developing things like the internet was a Department of Defense started, and then others took that, and that eventually became what we see today, and the iPhone and everything else. When you look at that, came from the military. Well, now it's the opposite. It comes from industry. Industry leads the way, and the military needs to partner better and find better ways, and we have to partner and do things. It is difficult. I'm not saying it's not a challenge, because you have to have, you just can't go out and buy anything. You don't want to buy the $800 pair of pliers or something stupid like that. So you have to have the checks and balances, but you have to be able to get it quicker. An example I'll use, our adversaries have figured out, and those out there, not only adversaries like North Korea, but folks, competitors, if you will, like Russia, for example. Civilian unmanned aerial systems flying over Ukraine, and they would see a formation of Ukrainian tanks, and minutes later, those Ukrainian tanks are gone because they've devastated them with artillery using that civilian system off the shelf. So we have to be able to do it. The good news is we have systems and ways to do it now. We're getting better at it. We still have a long ways to go to get even better. In the Army, we're looking at The Chief of Staff of the Army just a couple days ago announced really revising our acquisition and modernization to get it more efficient and effective and more timely. It's very important.
Here's an interesting question from our audience. If this presentation was held in Russia, China, or North Korea by one of their senior military officials for their citizens, what would he or she say about what the U.S. is doing?
It's a great question, you know, and it's interesting because I did brief, when I was in China, I went to their war college, their senior leaders, several of their key units and leaders. And my whole theme when I was in China was we have to find things in common so that we can talk about our differences. And I learned this in my experience, no question. I saw this. I had the challenge a few years ago of bringing the Iraqi Kurds and Iraqi Arabs together. And that was very difficult. They were standing apart from each other, wanting to kill each other. And then we had to get them doing joint operations so we could have a joint election, so they could do joint security. And eventually that's the joint force that we would assist in defeating ISIS here recently, working together. Very important. But they had a lot of historical differences. So it's really important to find those common areas. Now, it was fascinating. Everywhere I spoke, well, the first few places I spoke, I used examples like the Flying Tigers in World War II, where we had U.S. pilots flying for the Chinese Air Force before we were even in World War II. Ebola. We were fighting Ebola in Africa. We sent the famed 101st. There was a Vietnam veteran from the 101st out here. We sent the famed 101st, band of brothers from World War II, amazing unit, over to Africa. Maybe not a military mission, but who else could get there, isolate this thing, control it? And one of the units with them was a Chinese medical unit, which was very helpful. And so I used that example of working together, and we stopped the spread of Ebola. And it was the other services, 101st, but we had Marines, Navy there as well, but 101st was leading it and working with China. So I used a lot of these things in common, and then the first 6 questions I got were all extremely negative. And I had to actually get upset with a poor student I still feel a little guilty about to this day. It was like the 5th question in a row about conflict. And I said, now there's the problem. I said, see, all you're talking about is the differences and the challenge. And let's find some things in common. So everywhere I went, I was challenging them with that. And I do believe you're right. They look from a different perspective. Everybody does. If you were sitting in China, China has convinced themselves that things like the rebalance to the Pacific was to create another Cold War and stop them, which it was not. And I've been with Chinese generals I'm sitting at a table at a conference in Australia, for example, and we're agreeing on everything. Then he gets up there and talks, and he says, the United States is trying to start the Cold War again. That's why they're rebalancing. They're trying to stop us, and that is not what we're trying to do. We do want them, though, to live up to, that's kind of ironic when you look at China. The growth they've had is from the security they've enjoyed since World War II, a Bretton Woods conference, that is the international laws and orders and standards that have caused them incredible prosperity. They've benefited more than anybody, but others have benefited as well. And yet now they want to be a revisionist power and revise the rules to be a little more friendly to their form of government. And Russia, on the other hand, is a revanchist power. They are looking at revenge, and they want to revenge from the Cold War that you see now. So different perspectives. Yes, it would be a little bit different, but when you're there together and when you're with other nations, they'll admit we need to work together to find things in common. Competition does not need to be conflict. Conflict would be very stupid. So we're trying to work that out. But what I always emphasize with them is, if you say one thing, then please do it. Don't say one thing and then do another, because that's where you run into problems. So yeah, it's a great question. And again, we're not perfect. We all know that, but we're trying to do the best we can in maintaining the peace, stability, and security and prosperity that nobody has benefited more than the Pacific region. So in some ways you would say, why would we change it to another order that the rest of the world doesn't agree with? Anyway.
We're unfortunately at the time for just one more question. As you move, as military leaders do, from one theater or one post to another, you certainly take learnings from one area to another. this is a question from our audience. What were the main lessons you learned during your time in Iraq, and how are you applying the lessons in the Pacific?
That's another great question. I wish we had time. I'd go on all night. If you want to, I'll stay after if you have a question we didn't get to answer. But that's a great question, because you're absolutely right. If you are not learning, you're foolish. And what I learned was really fascinating. That's where I started to learn early on when I was in Iraq, and I saw how the world had changed from other challenges I've been involved in throughout my career, how rapidly information diffused, not just moved. I mean, it moved rapidly in the Civil War by telegraph, but how rapidly it diffuses. And the power, one example is like the power of perception. So, for example, I was in Mosul and we had the first free elections. I was a brigade commander. And we knew after the elections it takes time for things to happen, but we wanted the people to realize they took a big risk voting. So we wanted to show them some progress. So we hired people for jobs. One of those jobs was painting the curbs yellow. They used to be painted yellow under Saddam, and it was, you'd see these curbs all over. So we hired folks who were out working, not with anything in mind other than getting people working, starting to see some progress. We were starting to defeat the Al-Qaeda at the time. Things were looking pretty good, but we wanted to show some progress. So it spread like wildfire. The perception, hey, we've beaten the extremists, and markets started opening. People came out in the streets, and things opened up, and it was like this incredible freedom from the perception. And it really impacted me. I said, holy smokes, the power of perception is incredible. And you look at, again, something as simple as a tweet, what that can change, social media, information operations, different things. The power of perception is everywhere. So that's just an example, but there are hundreds and hundreds of examples. I would say the whole idea of that you have to thrive in ambiguity and chaos, where we started off being comfortable and then realized that's not good enough. You have to be masters of complexity, not let it become the master of you. And what I find, it's interesting, a business is running into the same challenges. How do they react fast enough? They always feel like they're being reactive and everything. Now it's different. I'm not trying to say business and military are the same, but it's just fascinating that the military, we moved to mission command and empowerment. And in dealing, and talking to groups, a lot of businesses have trouble with that, but they've adjusted and are a little bit better maybe in talent management. We get stuck in the past sometimes being a bureaucracy and can do a better job in that. So we do have a thing called the Center of Army Lessons Learned, and we have the Joint Lessons Learned, and we work very hard at capturing. One thing we're very good at, and we've learned it, all of us have learned it in the military, all the services, and many of you remember, we go through an exercise and then we drill into what we did wrong, and you can't be thin-skinned. And it's very interesting to watch. Most nations can't be as brutal as we are on each other. Most just can't do it. They'll be like, we'll tell somebody, you messed up, here's what you did wrong, without, in a heartbeat, learning. Because you want to learn in training and save lives later, whatever you have to do, be it humanitarian assistance, or if you have to be in combat. And so we have a very robust system, and we actually share. And when I was in Iraq with 25th Division, and I was Deputy Commanding General, we developed a way from every foxhole to get on the internet and share lessons learned in minutes from combat. And what was amazing is we had so many lessons. Things would happen, and immediately people would share what to do about it, what they learned. We had to create wikis and all these, and folks were getting on there and saving lives on a daily basis from sharing those lessons. And I was in a city on a patrol with a young captain 6 hours away from another city, and he's using a similar technique that worked. And I said, well, where'd you learn that? He said, hey, he shared it with us on the internet. We shared this lesson. So that tremendous ability works both ways, fortunately, for good and unfortunately for bad. But for us, sharing those lessons is absolutely key. And many of them apply in the Indo-Asia-Pacific region, that's for sure. So again, thanks very much. Is that our last question?
It is the last question. And, operating successfully in chaos goes a lot better when you have experienced strategic leaders, which you are. So thank you for being with us tonight, General Robert Brown, Commander of U.S. Army Forces in the Pacific, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. No, it's my honor.